All right. Good morning, Mary Jo. Very nice to have you. It feels like we're all in a bit of chaos. It's a Monday morning. I forgot my keys this morning, so I had to go back home. So I'm a little later. But here we are. We all did it. We made it.
We did acknowledge last week that Monday morning meetings, they're rough.
Sorry.
That's all right.
And here,
They're
yeah,
rough.
yeah. Mary Jo was very kind to give me a few dates, and this was the one that worked. So
It is worth it. It is absolutely worth it. So thankful to be here. And thank you for
Thank
joining us,
you.
Mary.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me for this always. We've done this once before and it was a lot of fun. So,
yeah. Well, and this one's exciting too because you have a new book out, right?
I do. Can I hold it up?
Yeah, absolutely.
Phonics Handbook. There we go. So it's just out 2 months ago, and it truly is a handbook for teachers. So I guess we're going to talk about that and some literacy things today.
Well, yeah, and I actually, I try to, if a guest has a newer book, I try to have it read. This time I was not able to do that. So if you want to take a second and tell us a little bit about it, and then we can get into some questions.
Well, actually, the roots of this book has to do with when I taught phonics at Ohio State. The state of Ohio requires all K-8 teachers to have a phonics course, and which was a real hard sell for the middle school people. As you can imagine, they're like, "What? I don't do phonics." And I said, "Yeah, you do. Because if you teach vocabulary, if you're teaching students how to break down the vocabulary in your content area, just think about math with, quad and try and tetra, all of those you need to show students how to break down those words." So anyway, by the end of the semester, they were believers in it because I showed them as they could take it into the classroom how they're helping students read their content. And we say this, everybody's a teacher of reading, but it really is true because you need to have the ability to help your students break the vocabulary down and understand the content. So anyway, this book, my students, a lot of them had never had phonics growing up, so they didn't have a lot of background themselves. So now they're trying to teach something they're not very confident in, that they're not even that knowledgeable about. Their pat answer was, well, that's an exception when a kid would ask about a word. And so we actually banned that phrase the whole semester, not allowed to say that. You have to, and maybe with the student, go in and look at, why is that word spelled like that? Why do we pronounce that word like that when it looks like this in the spelling? Uh, and it's okay not to know all the answers. 600,000 words in the English language. You're not going to explain every word to every kid. And I can actually give you some statistics about the language later on. But what happened is I made some podcasts for my students on each of the chapters that we were or each of the phonic elements we were looking at. So they had a podcast on long vowels, short vowels, consonants, blends and digraphs, the rhyme families. And so I took all those podcasts and now they have been, of course, blown out a little bit, but they are the chapters of this book. So the book at the beginning introduces the English language. What's the anticipation we have about language? That 50% of our words are decodable and so on. But also then it takes each of those elements like a long vowel chapter and it explains everything there is about long vowels and everything there is about short vowels so that it arms the teacher with all the knowledge they need in order to turn around and teach their students. So that's the chapter, or that's the book. And I got to the end of it all and I told my editor, but wait, there's more. I mean, there's things I want to talk about. There's a chapter on syllables, which is incredibly important at the middle school, right? Because that's where you're learning how to really break the words down and how might those words sound. But I said, wait, there's some more. We've got things like homonyms and word origins. And he said, okay, then make another chapter. But wait, there's more. So that's the last chapter of the book. So we've got 7 chapters. I've got, in the second chapter, I do have some application routines that the teachers can use. Once the kids learn the routines, you just substitute in the content that you want. So once they know this is what we're doing today, when you get your desk work done or whatever it is, or it's a learning center or however the teachers have their classroom set up, the kids know how to do it, saves a lot of time. Now, like, okay, the content has changed. I know what I'm supposed to do. When I come back and I have the routine, build it, and I'm supposed to be building words. They know what to do. So there is some activity direction in here at the end of every one of the chapters. So I don't know if that's getting a lot of glare, but anyway, at the end of every chapter, there's a couple of examples of things that can be done in the classroom. So it's building knowledge for the teacher and also giving them some things they can do with that in the classroom. I just presented at Denver at the NCTE conference, and it was on building your professional knowledge. So teachers knew that I wasn't going to do activities. It's about teaching you what you need to know to teach. And I had a double room ballroom, and it was full. And it just told me about how many, and people afterwards were like, I never learned this. This is so important. And so it told me that there's a lot of need out there for us to support teachers. If you're going to teach this, you need the background and you need to have the confidence that you can turn it around and teach it to the kids.
So one of the conversations we've had in my building, often we will give extra support or credence to our tested content areas. And we don't actually have a social studies test, for example, in the state of Wyoming. And so a couple things happen. On one hand, a lot of those teachers will feel like nobody cares about the work that they're doing in their classroom. Or on the other hand, there will be an effort by some of those teachers to say, no, we're tested too, because I would always say that informational reading is what I'm teaching when I was a social studies teacher, right? But one of the challenges is exactly what you said, which is a lot of the teachers feel a little too insecure. So I wonder if you have 2 or 3 common strategies that a non-reading teacher might be able to use or incorporate easily into their classroom that is quick and it doesn't feel like you're really teaching reading, but it feels like part of the content. Do you have 2 or 3 strategies that some of our teachers might try?
When I taught the content literacy course too, and one of the things we would really do with this is for my middle school folks, and one of the things we'd really do is look at text structure, because if you understand cause and effect, if you understand what I want to say, like problem and solution, if you have a compare and contrast, within that, you can help the students kind of break out that content. Like if this, then this. So what's some of the essential vocabulary within that we have to know to understand, oh, this was a problem and this is the possible solution. So one of the things I used to tell them to do was always, take a look, take a walk through the text before you ask kids to read it. What do we notice about it? Really teaching them how to read nonfiction, how to read that factual text, because we start out their reading life with a lot of fiction. So kids just expect a story to build, and then there's going to be this thing that happens, and then there's going to be this ending. But with nonfiction, we have maps, graphs, charts, tables that have information that's not in the body of the text. So we have to teach the students, let's go through the chapter before we even read it, or I give it to you to read, before you take it home tonight and read it, and we're going to talk about it tomorrow. Let's look what's in there. And what did the author do? The author bolded words for us. I mean, authors help us with that content. Let's look at the chapter at the end. Oh, they gave us 5 questions. Usually those 5 questions are in the order that you will find the answers in the text, right? So question 1 is going to be at the beginning of the chapter, and question 5 is going to be at the end of the chapter. So let's look at those questions ahead of time. What's the author think is important? So we're teaching them how to anticipate what they're reading. And that's one of the strategies I think we sometimes miss out on. It's like, let's let the author of the text help us be better readers of the content. Look at those questions at the end. Sometimes they give us vocabulary at the beginning. Do we know those words? I think it's important that a lot of times students try to sound out a word they haven't heard before. So then they're not sure, am I saying it right? Is that the word? I've never heard that. So helping them familiarize them what they're going to come across in that chapter. So I would think, just looking at the text structure, looking at what an author does to help you with bolded words. Sometimes they put in parentheses the pronunciation for you, and then the questions at the end that will tell you Let's anticipate. This is what this author thinks important for me to remember out of this whole chapter.
Does that I'm struggling with that a little bit, because I know that that would help take a test.
Mhm.
But when it comes to teaching a young child how to read, especially um, content reading, is the reliance upon the author's question giving them bad habits in that like they're not learning how to ask good questions to understand text?
Yeah, and I mean the and obviously with any age, one of the things we always want to do is check what the background knowledge is. What experiences do you already bring to this text? So if we're going to read something, about a particular, I don't know, the ocean, and what experiences do you have? Have you never been there? Do you need to build in some pre-reading experiences for them so that as they're reading, I like to do an anticipation guide with them and say, what do you anticipate? What do you think we're going to hear in this? We can do that just verbally, especially if they're young. Okay, this chapter is about ocean animals. What vocabulary? And I always use that language. Start building the language of language. What vocabulary do you think we're going to hear? Oh, whales, sharks, whatever they think they might know about the oceans. The other thing as the students are older is to create an anticipation guide and asking them, do you think this is a true or false? And then as you read, you have pointed out to them the things you want them to pay attention to. So now they are learning to read for a purpose. It's really about giving them purpose to read. However, you do that. If you don't want to use the chapter questions, but you want to create your own kinds of questions that you want the students to be thinking about, searching for. The one thing about an anticipation guide, if I say, there was an article on sleep that I had some fifth graders doing, and it had in there that everybody should get at least 8 hours of sleep. And so, true or false? Well, guess what they were doing? They were all looking for that as they were reading because they wanted to be right. And so, the anticipation guide not only gives kind of points them in a direction of what's important to read, but it lets them verify their own knowledge and whether or not they were, it was really fun to watch them because you'd hear them go, aha, because they came across the one where it talked about different ages actually can have different amounts of sleep. So it was a good way to get them to really focus their reading.
Mary Jo, can I just be a little bit controversial in this and maybe just dig in a little bit? Um, because on one hand, I fully agree with what you're saying. And on one hand, I say, yes, this is how you get kids excited to like look for this text. What I always struggle with, so I'm an English teacher by trade. What I would always struggle with is me as the teacher. So I'm going to get a real example. Me as a teacher, I would have study guides for novel reading, and we would use PDP Cornell note taking. And I would give them the questions, and they all talked about how helpful it was for them to recall and understand the story. But what happened when I would give them these anticipatory questions is that would refine and focus their attention on what I wanted. And then what they would lose is what they picked up, the ability to pick up what they just noticed, because they would read the novel through my eyes and my understanding. So is there a fault in giving too much uh, guidance in this is what you need to be looking for? Like, I understand we need to teach that, but is there a fault in giving too much guidance rather than them discovering information on their own?
So are you talking about a nonfiction or fiction?
All of it, all of it.
Oh,
So even like, right. So even if you did your guided questions, or like when we say go to the end of the chapter in your textbook and the author is going to give you these questions, that's very, very helpful. But then where is the excitement of just discovering something on their own? Because now we've told their brain this is what's important. And if you don't answer these questions, everything else isn't as important as these things. So now we're reading texts or literature or whatever it is through the lens of the author.
okay, then I would say um, flip the dialogue. Instead, have them at the end of reading something create their own. That they want to say, okay, you read the chapter or whatever it is you're reading, you read it. And at the end, I'm going to ask each of you to construct an anticipation guide, what you think somebody should take away from that chapter. Boy, that would be actually enlightening to find out what, because just like everything else we do, we all hone in on different things because we bring what we bring to a text. So somebody who has more experience with something may ask vastly different questions than somebody who this is brand new to them. And that's also going to be very telling to you of the base of experience that they bring. So just flip the dialogue and say, okay, at the end of reading this, I would like you to make an anticipation guide that we could share with the class next door. They're going to read the same book. What do you think everybody who reads that chapter should think about before they read, and see what they come up with?
And why do you think that whatever you chose, why is this important
Yeah,
for the
exactly.
next reader?
At
Man,
the
I feel like that would that's a strong assessment of their understanding of reading.
Yeah, I mean, if they could make a statement and then ask them to give a, qualifier, to say, why did you pick this item?
So gradual release is such an important part of learning something new, which is, it sounds like what we just described there. But Mary Jo, if you want to just expand on that a little bit, what does modeling and then gradual release look like when we talk about literacy instruction, since so much of understanding is occurring within our mind? Is that something that you discuss in your classes or the work that you do?
Oh, yeah, I'm the gradual release of responsibility. I'm going to say it was Pearson, but many years ago, they said, look, one of the ways we can help students become independent is through this gradual release of responsibility. And usually we start out. So if I want them to do an anticipation guide, I've got to do one for them to see what is this thing that we're asking. So it's an I do first. So I said, all right, we're reading this chapter. Before I read the chapter and I created these statements that I want you to think about as you're reading. And then we do the next chapter and say, all right, now we're going to do it together. So it's the we do. So, we do it together. The I do is I'm showing you, I'm the full model. We do, we're sharing the responsibility and doing one together. And oh, that's how you do that. Aha. And finally, we go into the last phase of you do. Now it's you. Now you're independent. You try and do that. And and depending on what the task is, we might have to do several I do's. This is how it's done. This is how I'm thinking about this. That's eventually going to help you when you're doing your tasks. Then we do it together, write together, come up with the questions together. That was a good question. Why was that a good statement that she made? And now why do we want to maybe revise that a little bit? And what are we thinking about in order to do that? And eventually turning it over to, now you try it. And then in that, we're still supposed to be supporting them, right? We're not going to just turn them loose on whatever, but the support is putting more of the responsibility on them eventually. So there's that gradual release where they feel that they can do it independently, that they have enough experience and background in order to do it on their own. And it's really that way with every literacy task, right?
Okay. So I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to try to come up with some key ideas that would make the adults a little more comfortable in this. So are there some very common misconceptions that if the adult could internalize and make sense of, that they would be in a better position to confidently teach students literacy? Or if that question is too difficult, maybe let me shift it this way a little bit, which would be, what are some foundational understandings about language and literacy that the adults maybe should hang on to that would make it a little easier?
Yeah, we have this whole push with the science of reading, and you almost can't have a conversation anymore. It doesn't filter in, which we've had for years. This research that should be supporting what we're doing, and it is saying, we need to give students the building blocks in order to be able to read independently. I mean, our goal, if we're a teacher, is that they should be able to do it without us. And so, what I really want people to have is the background knowledge so that when a student comes to them trying to understand how to decode and then flipping it to write, to encode. When you write, you put on full display your understanding of what letters could represent the sounds that we hear in our language. And so, we're talking a lot about sound letter relationships. So we might have the long A sound, but there's all these ways that we spell long A, right? So what I want people to do is to feel like they have enough of their own background knowledge and expertise to bring to the students and say, All right, let's take apart a bunch of words and take a look at them. Let's build some words. We have ATE. What are all the possible consonants we could put at the beginning of that? I'm thinking that the you know everybody comes to this point with different experiences, and we have to honor that. The teachers who feel like I'm confident in this and I can do that, and then we have the teachers who I saw in my session in Denver who were actually kind of fearful about don't be fearful of phonics, learn what it's about, and that's why they were there. And it was really interesting to watch them. I gave them a very robust handout, which by the way is on my webpage. I left it there because I let the teachers go there, downloading and making notes like crazy, because what they want to do is be able to answer any question the student comes to them with. But we can't always do that. Sometimes they're going to say, well, why is bread spelled like that? And then you say, well, because you can't say it's an exception. There's a history to that word. And there's a website called, it's something like Etymology Online. And I would send students there. I'm talking third, fifth graders that I've worked with. Let's go look the word up. What's the history of that word? And that alone gets kids kind of interested in the vocabulary. Their curiosity goes up. Now it's not just a fact of memorizing words, but making memories about the words. Well, I remember why bread is spelled that way. It's because of blah, 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 and we get into the whole history of the word. Memories are going to serve them better than memorizing, because memorizing, we know, is very short term and has little carryover sometimes. I mean, you all know, remember the 10 words you took on the Friday spelling test, and then the next week, here's my first graders writing in their journal misspelling the very word they got right on Friday, because what they had done is memorize the sequence of letters like we memorize a phone number. It just, if you don't keep calling that phone number, after a while you forget it. So they hadn't really internalized that word. They had memorized it, and that's not a that's it's frustrating to them, and it's frustrating to the teacher, because you're seeing them doing this writing, and now they're not applying what you were hoping they were learning.
So you talk about the etymology. I wonder if I think some of the fun of this conversation is trying to make sense or make logical what feels illogical. So you're saying look at the etymology as part of it. Do you have a few other than that will help us make sense of the English language a little bit?
Well, I do think the word origins, I mean, particularly when you look at let's see, zero is comes from a word that means empty. So you would talk to the kids about why would that be. You know what? And a lot of my middle school people were doing were word trees. We do a tree, and at the base of it we'd put the word port, and then they would, in the branches, we would. And I went into a fifth grade classroom. I had these big trees on papers. At the bottom was port and viz on another one, and AST on another one. And then we had the kids writing on the branches, astronomy, astrologer, astronaut, all the words they could think of. And I gave them a few minutes. Then I said, pass the trees. And apparently that is hilarious when you're a fifth grader. So anyway, all the trees shifted to some, and the kids were all trying to think of words related. So what is port, import, importation, deport, export? What are all of those words that have that root in it? It made the learning of vocabulary more interesting to them, and they could apply it in what they were learning. And it was just a lot of fun to watch them try to rack their brains for, they go, well, is important, does that work for import? And so I said, I don't know, let's look it up in the dictionary. Is that where that comes from? An unabridged dictionary, that really big fat one that's probably sitting in your library, has all that in there about where it has origin information in there. So we had to march down to the library and look that word up and see if it fit or not. Like dollar comes from Jakobsdollar, which is the first place they actually printed a paper dollar, and then it came to Holland and it was a thaler, and then it came to the United States and eventually became our dollar. But it has to do with Jakobsdollar in what was Czechoslovakia. So the history on that kind of stuff just makes it fun for them to learn the content.
A couple episodes ago, it'll be published here soon, or so a couple conversations ago, and I were chatting with um, a very smart individual who is saying that one of the reasons why students begin to struggle in sixth grade and higher in reading is because most teachers don't read beyond a sixth grade level. And that was fascinating to me,
Yeah.
right? That their concepts, unless you're an English teacher, many teachers and professionals kind of end at like that sixth grade level of reading and understanding. And so I've kind of been wrestling with that for a little bit. And so I'm going to build this kind of structure to ask my question. We've been talking about the, um, the phonics and phonemic awareness of reading, right? And so the five kind of core components of reading are I'm making sure to say this: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Okay. In our current culture, we are developing a new phonemic awareness and style of communication, in that texting is influencing how we write. We short form words consistently to communicate clearly. You look at any teenager's texts, us adults can't make heads or tails of it because they are restructuring the English language to communicate. Emojis are now very much a part of communication, right? Like if I want to write an email to somebody or text to somebody and I don't want them to be offended by my tone, instead of being a better writer, I put in a smiley face, right? So we're shifting the way that we communicate. And so I guess I kind of have a two-part question. The first one would be, is this style of communication making us poorer or worse readers? And then number two, does it matter? Like, are we creating a new form of communication that
Mhm.
is fine? As long as, if the point of it is to communicate, is it okay then?
I have a zero problem. Zero. I have no problem with the texting because, there's a whole thing going on in your brain when you're trying to say, are you coming, okay, I can do an are you instead of a you. I mean, you're doing almost a translation into a second language. It means there's an analogy aspect to it, and they're working through something they already know and making it like another level of language. And I think
Correct.
I actually think we see kids doing more kinds of writing because they're doing the texting than than before, right? Before, the writing was only in school. Now we're seeing the tech writing that goes back and forth between. And I mean, I do see this because my grandkids text me. They do different texting to us than they probably do their friends.
For sure.
So not only do they have a second language, they have a second language. Oh, grandma won't understand that, so I have to put it in this way, right? So I think it's yeah, I think they are recreating a language. They're creating a new language for us, and it's just like, when you used to say groovy, and now you don't say that. There's that whole shift in slang. My son bought me, I think I have it here, this really hilarious little wheel at Christmas time that you can spin it. And this is what a boomer says, and this is what a Gen X says, and so it's got like the translation of what each of those words mean in the next generation. So that's another language as well. There's generational languages. So I think it just makes our language grow, and things like that end up in the Webster dictionary. Will pick up a word that over time it's been used and used and used, and it's like becomes common words. So now it goes into the dictionary. It's great to know the dictionary is living. It hasn't ended. There's never an end, right? Because we're always creating, new words.
So one of the concerns I've wondered if we're over accommodating students with text to speech,
Yeah.
and if students start to have access to that too early in their learning process, if they're not going to engage with the actual text as a reader, but instead as a listener, what impact that might have. So, and I don't know if that's in your wheelhouse or not, but I do wonder if you have some thoughts on what comprehension as a listener versus as a reader means, and the
Me.
value of that, and what that should look like in schools.
Well, we know we have to have them read and comprehend. I mean, that's their everybody's going to have something in their lifetime where it's imperative that you read something and understood it, whether it's a legal document or whether it's something to do with your job.
Like in my class, I would try to make sure I had 3 or 4 options on a topic and students could pick. And so a lot of times it was a PDF, but more and more the students could hit play. And instead of reading that, they would just listen to it.
Can I answer that? And then Mary Jo, you tell me if I'm right or wrong. Can you just tell me that I'm right? And then, so I think, so if I'm, you're saying, Casey, you have some content and kids are listening to it rather than reading it. They are probably picking up information, and many of them will pick it up better auditorily because it's faster, and their auditory learning is faster, and because they're just listening to words. But then when you were to ask them to write something out, their spelling could be atrocious because phonemically they might be correct, but their spelling would be atrocious because they're just not familiar with seeing the word. Would you agree with that, Mary Jo?
Okay. The answer is yes. I think that's a brilliant analysis of what's
Thank you.
going on.
We beg for compliments, so there you go.
Yeah, I mean, auditory is the easy pass, right? I mean, you don't have as much work to do, and but at the same time, it might be supporting somebody who might not willingly read that or read it at the level you want them to understand it. So there's a trade-off there, right? Can they hear it and understand it? But then we need to go back to that and say, well, what vocabulary did you see in here that you need to know how to spell so you're not, an atrocious speller? And the reason we spell conventionally is so other people can read our work. So if you're not spelling it, if you're making up, the desert is cream filled, which was hilarious, instead of the dessert, that that misleads your reader to what you wanted them to understand. So it's kind of a push pull because you think, well, I want to support these students, but at the same time, I want to push them into the learning that they're going to take on some of the responsibility of not just being passive. So if the listening is passive, that's a problem. But at the same time, you're supporting some learners who maybe wouldn't read that at the level you want them to anyway. Does that make sense? So I'm sort of agreeing with Brian.
So the perfect blend would be listening while following along to the text.
Yes. Oh, you have to be following along on the text. You absolutely have to be watching the text. There's no doubt about that because you want them to be hearing that vocabulary that they're seeing.
Yeah, I remember I was taught in my early stages of becoming an English teacher is that one of the key responsibilities of an English teacher, and this professor was saying, you should be reading novels with your students. Don't assign it at home. Don't assign it in class. You have to be reading it with them because you are teaching them how to read. You are
Right.
teaching them how to not just pronounce the words, but you're teaching them how to give tone and how to give sarcasm and how to give different characters different. And so he was influential in saying, and even so Casey laughs at me, but even as adults, when we do workshops, I have read to my adult audience and there's not an age that people don't love being read to if you're a quality reader.
100%. I mean, and when I was doing content literacy for my middle childhood people, I would read a book. I'd find a nonfiction picture book that had content at the middle school level. So this it was a picture book, but it really wouldn't be appropriate for second or third grade. The content, the information, and I'd read it at the beginning of the class and they'd be like, oh, we love to hear a story. And they would take that into the classroom and the kids would say, oh, we love to hear a story because there's just something about story and humans. That's our way.
Actually, this transitions us nicely into some PD stuff I wanted to ask you. So, one of the questions I have, as Brian and I have worked more and more with adults, and I work with the adults in our building, is when you're working with adults, how much of that work should be like based in hands-on kind of activity versus working with adults to create a true, deeper understanding. And in this case, if we're talking about literacy, like how much of that work is them doing little literacy work versus some of this conversation that makes for deeper understanding?
Yeah. And, you and I talked about this a little bit. I've thought about it. I made myself a few notes to talk to you about that because it really is. I do a lot of PD. I go out to schools across the country, and the teachers want activities. We want things we can do with the kids, but activities really don't build confidence in the what students are learning. Like they can do it, but do they understand it? So understanding is really the goal. If I have students doing something, I have them do a word sort and they just sort them, but did they understand why they sorted them as they did? That the shift has to be, the teachers understand how to make good instructional decisions with the activity that they've chosen. What does it lead the student to? So we don't want to just a make it and take it kind of thing. We want something where the students are engaged in something that gets them to think beyond just what they know, but using what they know. And I think it's, as we watch kids, as I was watching, I did a whole research project on watching kids do word sorts in 5th grade. And these kids knew how to do the word sorts. But when it got down to it, they weren't looking at the parts of the word that I wanted them to look at. So they made their own kind of adventure, and it was enlightening for me because I realized that they still needed to understand the the robustness to the activity. Like, why are we doing this activity? Why are we sorting word cards? And they were words that they could read easily. It wasn't that they were hard. It was just the activity of being able to listen to the several sets of words, compare and contrast, sort them. So that activity was important for me to revise and rework so that it was more instructional for the students. So if we choose an activity, it has to be something that's going to move the students' understanding. It's going to build on what they have and move them to a greater understanding. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So in your work, how do you, so Brian and I talk about it as constructing knowledge, and our
hmm
goal with our students, once they have this knowledge, is they should be able to apply it in new situations. Well, this is true for the adults as well, right? So when you're working with those adults, how do you position them to get this new learning and then make it so they are comfortable enough that they're actually going to go and then do this work in their classroom?
Yep. So what I try to do is do a sample with them. It's that same thing. I do. Here's how it works. We do. We're going to work one together. And then I ask them to create one. And then we look at it and be for their students, because if I'm in a school, there's a range of, there's sometimes a range of grade level teachers. There's a range of abilities within their classroom. Sometimes their English is their second language. So what are we doing in your classroom that would meet the needs of your students? So I always take it to, look, these are the important aspects of this quote activity. These are our goals. This is what we want the students to understand. So now let's talk about, how do you create that to be a robust and useful activity in your classroom? And now let's create one. And then I support them by going around and working with them. Well, why did you choose that? And what's important about this way that you have it, that you can carry forward the rest of the year with other similar kinds of, if you do the same thing and change the content, then the students are familiar with it. It's also a time saver because now the students know what they're supposed to do. They just have different content to do it with. But I like to get them to create those themselves and see, it's not just about, here's a sheet and give it to the students. It's like, create something that meets the need of the students in your classroom. So that's my approach, is I give them one that I do with them. I'm going to guess that you all are going to be able to sort these words, let's say. And now I'm going to say, now let's do one together. Why are we sorting them the way we are? What did I think about as I was choosing the words? What was my goal? You have to have all of that. You have to have intention in every activity. It's not just to keep kids busy.
You typically, well, actually, maybe I'm wrong on this. You get invited into schools. You also do workshops, or go to conferences. Well, at the conferences, people are probably choosing your session. At the schools, a leader
Yeah.
is making people go to that session with you.
They
Uh,
get to go to our sessions, Casey. They
They get to go to our session.
Correct. Yes, that's it.
What you need to do is have a really great introduction, like, oh, we're so lucky to have her here. And then
And in doing that kind of work, you encounter a lot of different teachers who are in various stages in their career. We had a guy on, and we asked a similar question, and he said, beware of the traveler who believes he has already arrived. We definitely have some teachers who feel that way. So when you do this kind of work, how do you ensure that people at whatever stage they are in their career are able to do that work? Brian,
Can I make an analogy? Because I think you're actually asking the same question that I have. I'm going to make into an analogy, a purposeful analogy. So when you go into a school, when I go into my teacher PLCs, I have seasoned teachers. In my district, I have 10 of the 10 most longevity teachers in the district. 3 of them are in my building. They're like the Indiana football of teaching, right? But then you have your Ohio State teachers who think that they're really good, but they can't quite win the national championship.
you're going to get Mary Jo very upset there.
You see my Ohio State stuff back here?
Of course I see it. Of course I see it all. So how do you inspire the best team in the nation to still learn when they just destroyed everybody, but also teach those who clearly need some instruction? Am I helping you out, Casey? Is this helping?
I think you're making it worse.
I think we say to them, we're all here to learn and we can learn from each other. So those of you who are really great quarterbacks, you plodded along for years to get to this. What was what were your experiences that you can share with someone else to bring them to you, not to your level, but to your base of knowledge that make you so successful in your classroom? I mean, we do have to recognize that everybody comes to these workshops with different levels. And I say, we need to honor everybody that's here and what you bring to it. And we're going to be talking about a topic. If you have an experience, if you have some idea of how you want to add to the conversation, I invite you to do that. I want you to almost mentor those around us with what you might know. You might know something I don't know, because I've got my sphere of what I do, but you might have had come by way of, I had a student who was an engineer and she left the field to become a middle school math and science teacher.
Wow.
And the conversations that she could have in that class when we did content literacy was, it made the semester. So I think we honor where everybody is and bring to them and say, now, you're not here just as a learner, you're also here as a teacher. And if you have something to share and mentor and support everybody else in this room, have at it, because I'm going to leave and you all are still in this building. And so now, that you can go to her or she can help him or whatever the situation might be. And I think we have to take that fear away that, I can ask for help. We really have to take that away, that idea that, oh God, I don't know how to do this. And I just remember my first day of teaching 3rd grade, and I closed the door and I thought, wow, they're leaving me alone with all these kids, and there was a lot of things I had to ask, as every first year teacher. And I fortunately had a great next door neighbor 3rd grade teacher who helped me a lot. But you have to be willing to open up that conversation somehow. And sometimes during those PD sessions, I have some activities that I do with the people so they kind of actually get to know each other. Well, I didn't know that. I didn't know you were born there. Blah, blah, just those conversations that will open up that ability to communicate later after I leave.
By the way, Mary Jo, I need you to know that when the Bears were in the playoffs, somehow Brian was from Chicago, and then Indiana won the championship, and now all of a sudden he's from Indiana.
I am from Northwest Indiana, 15 minutes from Chicago, still claim Indiana. I got it all. We had a great year. Indiana, Chicago, we had a great year.
I think we're probably, we don't want to keep you forever. I just want to, yeah.
It's been fun. Thanks.
Yeah. And so we can finish up with a couple of questions. Brian might have one, but here's one I do want to leave our educational leaders with. Tell us as somebody, because I believe strongly that literacy, reading and writing is the most important thing we do as far as content goes in schools. what should our leaders, our building leaders, our district leaders be doing to make sure that we are truly supporting literacy in our schools?
You know, if you're an informed building leader, I think go in and say, let's try something together, new together, or you want to try a new idea, I'm here to help you do it. I mean, I think that I think we get the idea, and I mean, I know this was my experience for a long time, is that the building administrator was the person to judge. And what I want to see is that the building administrator is the person to support. So if that teacher says, I just feel like I need more help with this little group of readers because they're struggling. And then that building leader says, you know what, I'm going to take this little group out in the hall and we're going to read together and, give that teacher 10 minutes of your time. I know building administrators are loaded with other things to do, but sometimes that 10 minutes in a week is enough to not, I mean, the kids feel extra special and the teacher gets that little breather. Plus, you might be able to tap into something with those children that teacher hasn't, seen yet. I think it's the role of being not only, I don't want to say coach or mentor, but a support rather than just a judge of whether or not, because we hear this, oh, and they did a walkthrough and she didn't have the sound wall on the right, that's stuff. What I want to see a building administrator do is really support the teacher in his or her journey of being a better teacher every year. You build your experience and you say, well, I remember that. I'll never do that again, or, oh my gosh, this was so moving to watch the kids really click on what we've been trying to learn. That is a really important approach that I took. I've got to do that again.
We had Todd Whitaker on quite a while ago, and he was talking about this concept of um, principals won't go into certain classrooms because they're afraid that if something goes wrong, they won't know how to support. They won't know what to do.
Okay.
And that has kind of struck me quite a bit as a conviction, for sure, but also as a maybe a very obvious challenge to teachers and but principals in this context. Because I would say that the oftentimes why administrators judge rather than support is because they don't know how to support.
Yeah.
They don't know how to help. They don't know how to step in. If you asked, I think a decent, sadly and embarrassingly, a decent amount of principals, can you help my struggling students with fill in the blank? A large percentage of us wouldn't know how to do that. And so there's a judgment to it. Well, you're the teacher, you need to. And so maybe I'm kind of putting weight or responsibility on my fellow principals of we do have to be supporting. And if you don't know how to support in reading or math or history, we just had a conversation with Maggie Jackson, who wrote a book called Uncertainty. Well, it's okay to be like, I don't know how. If you teach me how to do it, like I can help you, I can support you. All right, let me go learn really quick and I'll come back and support you. But you saying admin often are judges rather than supporters, it makes me mad that I agree with you. um, and I
But
don't like that.
but you know what? But I don't think there's anything wrong with the principal going, you know what? I don't know either. Let's find out together.
But we don't do that either.
Yeah.
Right? That's not something common. I mean, the if you were to ask in one of your conferences, how many of you have a principal when they don't know what to do, ask you, I don't know either, let's do it together. I would say a vast majority of teachers would not raise their hands.
Let me, I want you to have an opportunity to share maybe some experiences where you've seen this happen successful, because what I think maybe is a little bit true, and maybe it's always been true, I don't know. But I think that because the principal job has become so administrative, that very often we're not looking for instructional leaders. So, Mary Jo, in your opportunity to go into lots of schools, when you've encountered principals that are true instructional leaders, what has that looked like? What have they done to be instructional leaders?
I think they've gone into these workshops. I love when I'm in a building and the principal's in there with the teachers. because a lot of times it's like, it was a great idea for the principal for me to be there, but now I want that principal to be there too. So they hear the same message, they're doing the same activities. So I do think that they need to participate with the teachers in that sort of, and that's my biggest takeaway is if you're going to bring PD into the school, join with the teachers in that PD. And I've been in where they even had administrators from central office come in. So those people are hearing it. There's another set of ears, and they can come into the building and offer support to the teachers as well. So I think
It's a
it's
pretty
not,
loud message when they sit in
yeah,
the back that
yep,
this is for you, not for us.
right. And if they participate, it says it's important enough. I'm participating.
Okay, we are, I think, officially to the segment where Casey, we are going to get into the takeaways.
Okay.
Mary Jo, as always, you come and you just bring so much wisdom, and we appreciate you hanging out with us.
Thank you.
And so you don't have to give a takeaway because you bring the meal. So, Casey, any takeaways from today?
Yeah, I took a lot of notes, but towards the beginning of our conversation, you talked about decoding and encoding, and it was a nice reminder that literacy is a process that includes being able to consume information but then express it, whether we're talking about through the spoken language or the written language, and that there's a real relationship between the two. And as one strengthens, so does the other. And I think that's really important for our teachers to know and understand.
Absolutely.
So, Mary Jo, thank you for that.
Goes both ways.
Yeah, I think what I wrote down that impacted me the most that I'm going to wrestle with quite a bit because it doesn't just relate to remembering vocabulary, but you said memories versus memorize. And I think that there's just a ton of truth to that and weight to that. So even considering my staff, right, I don't necessarily make them memorize anything, but we try and remember protocols or expectations and those kinds of things. But attaching memories to those expectations, it just brings so much value and purpose that I want to in many contexts with my kids even and training them how to become young men and women. The power of memories versus memorize, I think is something that I'm gonna have to play with and wrestle with and then give it to my staff in some way. I think it's great.
I'm glad you like that.
Yeah, thank you. Any parting words from you, Mary Jo? If there's one piece of advice that you can give the listening world,
Read, write. Don't be afraid to learn something new. It actually is great for your brain to fire that up. And teachers have hard jobs, so let's support them and the administrators who go in and support them as well. So it's my privilege to be an educator.
we judge, Mary Jo. We don't support. We judge.
Mary Jo, if people want to get a hold of you, how might they do that?
They can go to my website, maryjofresh.com, and there's a contact right on there.
Okay,
And
awesome.
I'd love to.
Well,
There's lots of free resources, some videos, and some other things. I'm working on a book of decodable poems, and there's gonna be lots of stuff. I didn't write the poems; a poet did. But there's gonna be lots of stuff on there, handouts, things teachers can download.
Perfect.
well,
Free.
Mary Jo, we appreciate having you on the show. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you
It's
so
always a
much.
pleasure. Always a
Thanks.
pleasure.
Great to see both of you. Take care. Have a great day.
You
Thank
too.
you.